So I think one of the things that a lot of people struggle with when it comes to fitness is actually measuring it, right? Like, how do I know if I'm getting fitter? What does fitness even mean? Like, how do I know if I'm better than I was a year ago? How do I know if I'm worse than I was a year ago? How do I compare it to the guy next to me or the guy on the other side of me? Like, where is the measurement in this whole thing? And that's been a really tough thing to try and figure out. And what I've done is I created this graph here, and I'm going to share with you what I call the fitness curve. And now I want to give credit where credit's due. This was originally presented to me in the world of CrossFit. So the guy who found CrossFit, his name was Greg Glassman. He came up with this idea because he was struggling with the same thing that I was. And I was, a fitness professional. I graduated from college with a degree in fitness, but nobody could define it for me. It was very subjective. It didn't make a lot of sense. Everybody had a different idea of it. And I think that still persists to this day. And it wasn't until sort of CrossFit came around and they came up with some different models that really made sense to me. And I'm like, look, this is exactly what we need to be doing. So let me share with you what it means to measure your fitness. Now, it can be a little bit complicated because it's hard to collect a lot of data on one person in one particular moment. But let me just give you this framework. So on the y-axis, we have power output. Okay, so we need a way to measure the output of someone's physical activity, right? So if we know that fitness has something to do with physical work, right? How do we measure work? And we'll just call it force times distance. So for example, if I'm doing, let's just say a squat, and I've got a barbell and it's 45 pounds, and I know how much the weight is, the weight of my bar, the weight of my body, and I know the distance that I'm going to travel. I'm going to squat down. The bar's going to, my center of mass is going to move a certain distance down and then go back up. So I can measure this almost exactly, right? I can figure out how much output I'll create in any particular exercise. And now, so we've got this end, but then we need to factor in one other thing. It's time, right? So let's use the squat as an example again. So if I were to tell you that, look, I want you to do 30 seconds of as many 45-pound back squats as you possibly can. You got 30 seconds, we're gonna run a clock, and then you're gonna tell me how many repetitions you did. We can figure out exactly someone's power based on force times distance over time, right? So if you did 30 repetitions, we can measure that power number precisely, right? And we can measure it compared to somebody else who might have gotten 50 repetitions, right? So obviously the person that got 50 is gonna output much higher because they did so much more work. Their output was higher in that same period of time, right? So let's just say, let's say we tested you and we put a number, we put a dot on the board, right? So we put you somewhere around here, okay? And now let's do something else. Let's get you on the rower, on a rowing machine, and we'll measure how far, the distance that you can cover in 30 seconds. So then we get another data point, right? And we can just keep doing this. There's literally an infinite number of things, activities that we can do to test you within this 30 seconds, right? And generally the things that are gonna allow you to create the highest levels of output, the highest numbers on these graphs are going to be exercises where you move the largest loads, right? Force, the longest distances. Okay, so let me say it again. The best exercises to really put some high numbers on here is to do exercises that allow you to move large loads, long distances, and quickly. Okay, so those are the ones that are really gonna allow you to put these up here, right? So let's just say we did 10 different things, right? So we got 10 dots on the board, and then we can take an average, right? So somewhere in the middle, right? So we've got an average. Okay, now we'll do the same thing for the 1 minute mark. Right? So we can test a whole bunch of different things. There's all kinds of different variations of exercises we can do. Generally speaking, we want to test exercises or workouts that move large loads, long distances, and quickly. So we get a bunch of data points here, right? Like so, and then we'll find the average, okay? And then we can do the same thing at 2 minutes. We can do the same thing at 5 minutes, we can do the same thing at 10 minutes, right? And everything in between, right? There's an infinite number of data points that we can collect here. And here's the thing, we know that the highest power outputs can happen in the shortest distances, right? It's why like sprinters have so much, they can cover so much distance in a short period of time, but over time, that's going to drop off, right? And that's going to show up on this curve, right? So what generally starts to happen, again, we collect a bunch of data points, right? Like so. And the curve is going to start to look like this. Like so, okay? So short duration, high effort, high power, right? And then as we extend this out, our body has to slow down. We can't sustain as high of a power output as we can in just like 10 seconds or 30 seconds. That's why we can't sprint a marathon, right? And then we can map this thing out. And the more workouts we do, the more tests that we do day in and day out, our goal is always to push this line up, right? And it's not just in the short duration, it's not in the long duration, it's all of this stuff, right? We want this whole line to go up because this is your fitness right here. It's that space below the curve. This is your fitness, right? And if we've got enough data on someone, if we've collected enough of this stuff, we know what your fitness looks like, right? So the people with the biggest space under this curve are the fittest human beings around. Okay, so as a model, I hope that makes sense. Like, what does this look like in real life? Well, you got to get after it, right? Like, you have to do different workouts, different time domains, different activities, but generally, what are the best activities that you can do? They're the exercises that allow you to move those long distances quickly. What's the most efficient way to do that? What's the best tool for the job? Generally speaking, it's a barbell, because we can move large distances, long distances quickly with a bar, right? So that's why we do the things we do. It's all to enhance, to build this space under the curve. And what this does is it hedges you away from death. The lower this curve is, the less space you have under this curve, the closer you are to being non-functional. And the end game of non-function when you're no longer breathing is the zero line, right? So this is our way to hedge ourselves against this thing called aging, right? As we get older, we want to continue to push that line up. How far can we get? And the earlier you start, the more you can create more space. It's almost like building health equity, fitness equity. We want to build that space under the curve, okay? So hopefully it makes sense. And what we generally find, because we've been doing this for a very long time now, most of our efforts, now, of course, we want to push this whole curve up, but most of our efforts where we get the best response from training is usually in 20 minutes. I'm going to say 15, 20 minutes. So I'm going to draw a line here, okay? So in this time domain, from 0 to about 20 minutes, 15, 20 minutes, this type of training in here lends itself very, very well to the stuff out here. So 30 minutes and longer, okay, or 20 minutes and longer. And this would be considered to be a bit more anaerobic. You may have heard these words before, right? So it's a little bit more higher. It is higher intensity, right? It's higher intensity because we're just not going for as long of a period of time. So we can output more power. We can get more data points higher up on the curve, right? So this more anaerobic stuff lends itself very well to the longer duration stuff. But what the other side of this thing is if we spend a lot of time doing long duration stuff, it does not move the needle on this side. So training here moves the needle over here very, very well. Doing most of the training here does not move the needle here. And I would argue that most of the stuff that we do in everyday life tends to be a little bit more around here, right? When we're really working hard, it's these shorter duration kind of bursts of effort that we put in. And that even looks a lot like sport as well, right? There are some sports that play out here, but they're more of the long endurance ones, like the triathlons, the marathons, right? The ultra endurance events kind of sit out here. So that's why most of our training is done in this area here for general fitness, because not only can we really push these up, it lends itself very well to everyday life, and it also creates adaptation over here. Whereas over here, if we just train over here, it does not create adaptation over here. In fact, it decreases adaptation over here, right? So the people who have the best endurance, long duration endurance, have very little power outputs in the shorter durations, right? It's why marathon runners are terrible sprinters, right? So again, we want kind of the whole package. So most of our training in Athletic After 40 is done over here, but we can also add in some stuff over here, but it's only maybe once a week, once every 2 weeks. It's much less right? We want to give that stimulus once in a while, but it's not where we spend most of our time. All right, so hopefully that makes sense. But this is a great way to sort of think about, what are the best things that we can do? What are the things? Move, do exercises, do routines that allow us to hit high power outputs, stay below that 15, 20-minute mark, because you can be at a higher intensity there where you can make the most impact on that curve. Out here, it's very hard to move that curve because it becomes more of a survival game out here than it does an intensity game. All right, hope that finds you well. And if you have questions, let me know.